Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we are going to be going over kind of a glass morphism type of style, kind of like you see on this right hand reference over here, where we kind of have these rough glass objects on top of like a UI or a UX. And we're just going to be throwing together a fun little scene from scratch. We have no plan going into this, so I'm going to go and open up an entirely, actually we'll use this document here. I'm just going to save this document into my Instagram folder and call this glass fun, and we're just gonna hop right into this thing. Cool. All right, so we're just gonna kind of mess around here. So the very first thing I'm gonna do is head over to my material preview tab. We're in cycles here, and I'm just gonna add in an image as planes. I'm gonna go to my downloads folder. Now I have a couple of images that I downloaded for this exact purpose, and they're just nice little gradients. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop them in here, and we're just going to add them all into our scene, and then we're going to adjust them as needed. So which gradient was that? Okay, so let's grab this one, and then we're going to go ahead and keep adding a couple more in. I think I want to have like 3 or 4 in here, and as you guys can see, I'm just kind of bringing them up here to kind of organize them, and we're going to add maybe 2 more in here, and then we're going to start messing around with them, adding some glass objects in, and kind of seeing where this thing can go. Cool. Those ones are actually very similar, but we'll still use them. And then we'll just drag one more in here. I kind of like this mountain one, so I'm going to use that. Luckily, these are all like about the same size, so I'm going to highlight all of them, and I'm just going to rotate them like this, holding control so we can snap them into place, bring them down above the floor, scale them up, and then I'm just going to hide these cubes that I added. And I think what we're going to do is just kind of place these things around our scene. So I'm going to go to my top-down view, and I am going to use my grid snapping right here. I'm going to turn it on. It's right up here. And I'm just going to bring these around, snap them in kind of like a nice fashion here, hopefully. That looks kind of good. And I think I'm going to rotate them as well, some of them. Now, if you hold shift, you can kind of snap it more incrementally. That looks pretty good. Perfect, and we're going to rotate this one as well. Something like that looks kind of nice. Now let's go to our rendered view. Now, as you can see, we have these really nice pieces of like art on the floor here. I'm going to go ahead and snap to my camera, and I'm going to change this to an orthographic perspective, and already you can start to see this is looking really nice. I'm going to turn off snapping. Now again, for my lighting, I'm just using an HDRI, and this HDRI actually works very well for this specific scenario. I'm going to zoom out right here. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is expand this floor plane, and right away we already kind of have something that looks really nice. And to zoom in on my scene a little bit more, under my viewport display properties for my camera, I'm just going to up this value so we can kind of narrow in on what we're looking at. And already we have something that looks really cool, especially with this orthographic perspective. Everything's laid out really nicely for us. Now, a couple of things that I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all raise the exposure in our scene here. I'm just going to raise it a little bit, and I'm also going to go over to my shading tab, go to my world properties. I'm going to zoom out here so you guys can see this. I'm going to expand Blender a little bit, snap back to my camera view, go to rendered view, add in a mapping node here, and I'm also going to move my face over here so you guys can really see what I'm doing. I'm going to add in a texture coordinate node right here. I'm just going to plug it in like this so we can easily adjust our lighting. So now, as you guys can see, when I adjust the Z value, the whole background is going to move, which is fantastic. So I'm actually going to move my background until I really like the lighting. I think that's perfect. We have some nice shadows under here. Again, this base floor right here, if we go to our object, has no material. So I'm just going to add a new principled BSDF. Now what's great is we can now adjust the roughness right here. I think I'm going to make it maybe slightly metallic and maybe like a lower roughness. Now, you don't want to make it too low because if you see we have a nice reflection there, so I'm actually going to raise the roughness up just a little bit. I think that looks really nice. Let's go back to our layout and let's go ahead and like really get into this thing. So right now we have a nice isometric view of our scene. Things are looking really nice and clean. I actually think I'm going to get rid of this image here, and I'm going to replace it with a copy of this image. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and I'm just going to kind of zoom in here and check my spacing. I want the spacing to be relatively uniform, and now that I'm out of snapping mode, I'm just going to try to adjust this manually. This looks pretty good. The spacing looks pretty even. You guys can spend as much time as you want on that specific part. Now, if you want to, you can leave room for text on the left or the right, do something like that. I'm going to keep everything centered, and I'm going to start adding in some fun objects. So one of the first things I want to add in is a cube, and I want to scale it down on the Z-axis, and I just want to scale it up a little bit and bring it down so it's like right above our objects here like this. And then I'm going to pop open this tab over here with N, and I'm going to drag this along the Y. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply the scale to this, and then I'm going to give this a glass shader. But before I do that, I'm going to add a slight bevel to it. If you zoom in, you can see the bevel, just the slightest bevel with maybe like 10 subdivisions on that edge, or 10 segments. Shade that auto smooth, and now let's give this a nice glass surface. New material, glass BSDF, and now already we have this really cool look. Now if you lower this IOR to like 1.1, you can see we're starting to get this kind of like glass morphism look already. And what's cool is now we can kind of drag this wherever we see fit, you know, and then what we can do is once we're happy with the material, we can then duplicate it. Now right now the roughness is at like a really high value. The IOR is at 1.05, which is really low. So you might want to even try something like 1.1 just so you can see that slight edge there. Now you'll see if you experiment with different values, it's going to be hard to see through this. This is the IOR of water, 1.33, but I think I'm going to go with something like 1.1 just to kind of establish that really nice aesthetic there. And then I'm going to add in a cylinder, scale that down a bunch. Again, I'm kind of going for this like this glass look on the right hand side here where it kind of has a piece of glass over like a colorful area, and it kind of diffuses that area. So I'm going to zoom in solid mode here, add a modifier. I'm going to add a bevel modifier, a edge split modifier, and a subdivision surface modifier. I'm also going to apply my scale, lower my bevel, and then give myself like, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 8 divisions, and bump up those subdivisions as well. I'm just going to copy this material here. And as you guys can see, we have this really nice glass disc now that I'll just lower right above the surface here, scale it up maybe a little bit, and then I think I'm going to kind of bring it to this corner here. So I'm just going to bring it like maybe right there. And as you guys can see, we have this really nice diffused glass look. And what's cool is we can kind of start to customize like where these things might be. This one looks a little saturated, so I don't know if I'm in love with this specific area right here. But what's cool is we can now adjust the roughness as needed. Let's see, 1.5. 1.5 is the actual IOR of glass, so if you guys want to use that, you can. Just be careful with your roughness, because when it's too rough, it's hard to see through. This is no roughness, and then as we raise our roughness up, you can see we start to get these really interesting effects. Now, another thing I'm going to experiment with too is I'm actually going to bring a couple of these cylinders over here, and I think I might stack them with different colors. So I'm going to kind of bring one close to the floor here, and I think I'm going to duplicate this glass material, maybe just give it a slight blue color, duplicate it, bring it up, and then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that color again, maybe a slight yellow or orange kind of color. And this is where you can kind of mess around with these little like different shapes and kind of organize this scene in a way that makes sense to you. So I'm also going to duplicate this little cube over here. I'm going to rotate it on my x-axis 90 degrees, bring it up, and I'm going to kind of start blocking out my scene. I think maybe for this one just like a slight purple, maybe even red. That looks pretty good. And what's cool is you can kind of start building out your scene however you want, however you see fit. You can also duplicate this, bring it over on the Y, scale it on the Z, bring it over here, and just kind of add different elements into your scene like this. And it's really fun because it's really easy and quick to just change these colors on these different blocks, and it's just fun to kind of organize a scene like this. Now, another thing I'm going to do to kind of enhance this, also make sure you apply your scale whenever you adjust your objects. I'm also going to enable some depth of field on our camera here. So I'm going to click on depth of field, and you'll already notice everything starts to soften up even more. And let's just focus on this specific cylinder right here. And as you can see, our depth of field is 2.8, and I think I'm actually going to keep it at that. I'm also going to duplicate this as well. And I'm kind of just moving things around our scene here in a way that I see fit. Like I think this looks really nice right here. I'm going to duplicate the color, and I think I'm going to give this one more of like a slight orange, maybe yellow kind of color. You don't want to make it too intense, but again, this is kind of how you add some color to the scene. I'm not really loving this one, so I'm going to bring it up a little bit right here. That looks good. And as you can see, we can just start to piece things together just with some images and some glass pieces. Now, what's really fun about this is it doesn't have to stop here at just these basic primitives. You can add pretty much whatever you want. If you want to add a torus in here, you can absolutely do that. Give this a nice subdivision surface, shade it smooth, and then maybe just give it a nice glass texture. Let's see, already this is looking really fun. I'm going to bring it back here and scale it up. Make sure you apply that scale. And I'm going to bring it down into our scene here. And that's just a really fun way to kind of spice things up in your scene here. Now this one, maybe just make it just slightly purple. Now again, with your camera, make sure that you adjust this setting, this pass part out, so you can really see what's in your scene here. Now, this is just a really fun way to kind of piece things together with really, really simple elements. Another thing that I did earlier that I didn't show you guys is I actually raised all of my max bounces here to 30. And I'm also going to disable filter glossy, set that to 0. And you can kind of see we have some really awesome things happening here. Another thing I think I'm going to do is add a little bit more dimension to our floor. Also with the camera, I'm going to raise my f-stop up to like 5. Again, most of this is kind of just a big experiment at this point. Let me just look at my references over here, see if I'm missing anything. Now, it's interesting because in one of our references on the right here, we can see this little grid formation. You can totally add something like that. Let me take a look here. There's another thing I'm going to add that's really going to jump this thing up to the next level, and that's these really nice shadows. You can kind of see these shadows coming across the diagonal here in our reference. I'm going to show you guys how to easily add shadows into your scene. Watch how awesome this is. Go ahead and jump out like this, right? Go ahead and add in a cylinder. Scale it up on the Z like a lot. Watch. Now watch this. Go to my top-down view here. Oops, stay in rendered view. Go to my top-down view. Look at this. See wherever I put this, it's going to cast a shadow, right? A really, really harsh shadow. Now, what's fun about this is now what we can do is we can say, oh, you know what? I think the light source is coming from this direction. Check this out. Just add an array to your cylinder here. Maybe like a 5 count. Spread these bad boys out. Go to my top-down view. Rotate them like this. And already we have some awesome shadows coming in through here. Now, the smaller these are, the more harsh the shadows will be. But you should notice a difference in the scene. Now, if you don't notice too much of a difference, we can just add our own light source. So I'm going to go ahead and add in an area light, move it over here, and I'm going to move it like right behind our cylinders like this, scale it up, and then I'm just going to point it like towards our central scene here. So it's kind of coming through these bars that we've created. Now, these bars, you don't even need to apply a material to. But watch what happens when we start to raise the strength of our light. Right now, it's at 10. Now, if you do like 5,000, which is what I just did, you can get some really intense lighting on here. And then you just kind of have to mess with the actual angle itself. But as you can see, we do have some slight shadows on here. Now, this HDRI is actually pretty bright, so I'm going to try a different one really quickly. Let's try this one. That's an 8K one, so we have to be careful. And definitely be careful with the actual lighting itself because the HDRI might already be casting something onto your scene. This is like a studio environment, but as you can see, we do have these lights coming in here. Also going to rotate this a little bit like that. That looks good. So as you can see, we can have this interesting lighting coming into our scene here. But again, just be really, really careful because right now this HDRI is way too dark. So I'm going to switch back to the original one we had. But like I said, guys, depending on your angle, so if we go back to our shading, depending on your angle here, if you go to your world properties, you can actually adjust this as needed so that maybe the light source isn't coming directly in the same way. And you can start to see these shadows really peek through. Let's go ahead and adjust the lighting a little bit more. I'm going to set my exposure back to 0. Keep adjusting my lighting here. Cool. Now the lighting's kind of coming from the left side. I'm actually going to reset it. I actually liked what we had before. Cool. And then again, our light source, just be careful with where you put this, but depending on where you put it, you're going to have different effects on that interesting like lighting result. Cool. Now the actual spread of the light is 180 right now. You can definitely set that to different values. There we go. That value looks good there. So that's about 20 degrees, and you can see we have like a much harsher lighting scenario. I'm also going to lower that to 1,000, but notice these like lights that are coming in here, like these streaks. That's kind of like the look we're going for, so you can go with something like that. You can also lower your exposure just a little bit. And as you can see, we have these interesting streaks coming through on the right-hand side here, and it gives you even more of a strong feel for this like minimalistic kind of perspective vibe. Cool. And this is starting to look really, really cool. Let's add in that little grid feature I was talking about earlier. Let's go back to solid view. Let's add in a mesh plane. Just scale it up a bit. Object, apply scale. Tab into edit mode, subdivide this a few times, and then just add a wireframe modifier. And just like that, we have a nice little grid to work with here. Now what's cool about this grid is we can pretty much do anything we want. You can also add a solidify modifier on top of that, which is going to further solidify it, obviously. Something like that looks kind of nice. That's pretty much perfect. I'm going to bring that down below our scene, or sorry, like towards the surface there. And I'm going to try to put it somewhere over here. Let's just go ahead and see how that looks so far. That's really cool. It actually adds a nice element to our scene. I think I'm going to bring these up and over. Now, this doesn't really have a material, but you guys can just add a glass material to that as well. Let's go ahead and add a glass BSDF. And it's kind of subtle, but it looks nice. Scale it down just a little bit, bring it down, maybe just right above the surface there. And as you guys can see, things are looking really, really nice. I like the aesthetic so far. And I think it's really easy to just piece things together as needed. So kind of adjust the coloration of some things. We have these rough objects here. Things are looking fun and minimalistic. So I'm definitely excited about just what is possible here. Now there's a little bit of empty space on the right hand side here. If that's what you want, that's fine. At this point, I'm pretty happy with what we have. I mean, the only other thing I can think of is maybe duplicating this shape here. And then I'm just going to zoom in on here, rotating this 90 degrees, maybe bringing it up for like a nice shadow. Now, one thing we didn't do is enable caustics, but if we enabled caustics on this, I mean, this would probably just bring this thing to the next level. Let me just make this slightly green like that. It's just a really fun thing to mess with. Just this really interesting aesthetic. I enjoy this stuff a lot, and I think it's fun because there's really no limits. Once you know how to create like the absolute basics, there's no limits at all to what you can do. Really, your creativity is truly the limit here. Now, this is really an involved scene, so I might actually swap a few of these out with the more simpler textures here. Let's see. This one is really distracting, but as you guys can see, that's pretty much how you do these things. You've probably seen a lot of people do stuff like this. As I'm talking, I'm just going to be kind of experimenting here with some different ideas I have, but this is pretty much how people are making these types of things. They're adding some really intense lighting, some shadows, a lot of different objects, different colorful objects. I think I'm going to delete that, bring some more space in here. I don't love the Taurus. I'm going to get rid of that. I just love this look and feel, and I think the vibe is good. Let me see if I can bring this back. That looks kind of cool. I think that's pretty good. Now, this piece right here, I'm going to just give this like a slight blue, maybe green shader. Bring this off to the left. And I'm going to give this an array modifier because I want this to go up and up and up. All right. Oops, that is the wrong direction. I think it's because, yeah, it's because we didn't apply the rotation. But let me just do that. Like, I think that looks pretty cool. You guys can pretty much do whatever you want. The limit is your own creativity. Cool. And I think this looks really good. It's really fun. It's just like a nice, simple aesthetic. You can mess around more with the saturation, maybe desaturate your colors a little bit. You don't want them to be too intense. Again, a lot of this is a fine-tuning process that you'll get the hang of as you go. I'm just experimenting, messing around. But as you can see, like, this minimalistic look isn't too hard to achieve. It really is just about like what do you want it to look like. And if you wanted to, you could replicate one of my references exactly like you see on the right hand side here. But I don't know, I just love this vibe, this look. It looks really cool. You can animate this. You can change your look to maybe like medium high contrast, very high contrast. This is very high contrast right here. Turn your exposure back to 0. And this is looking really, really clean, really nice. I don't know, I had a lot of fun making this. I think I might enable caustics and see if that works out. With your floor plane selected, just go over to your, where is it, object properties? Yeah, object properties, shading, receive shadow caustics. Now, to test this real quick, I'm just going to click on this shape here and see if I can cast caustics. I think it is working. Yeah, I think if you look really, really closely right here, actually, you know how to make it work for sure. Just click on your light source, and this should be the determining factor, because sometimes the HDRI won't let you have caustics, but if you click on shadow caustics right here on your light source, yep, now we have our caustics. You can see the caustics right here. So I'm going to actually check this out. This is a really easy way to make everything have caustics right away. So I'm going to go ahead to my solid view. I'm going to highlight, I think I'm going to highlight everything like but the camera, like that. And then if you guys go over to your object properties and you hold Alt and you click on cast shadow caustics, now they all have that same attribute. So now they should all be casting shadow caustics right now. We should be good. Yeah, I think everything should be casting caustics at this point. It's going to be hard to tell at some angles, but again, you guys can adjust everything as needed. I think this is looking really, really cool. Maybe I'll add like a couple, maybe I'll add like one more of these over here, rotate it on the Z 90 degrees, bring it down, bring it back on the X, maybe like a really big one of these. Yeah, let's do that. All right, let me just check where this thing is on the floor. Also, guys, to enable those random colors, click on this little drop down up here and click on random. That looks good. Cool. I actually really like this color right here, so I'm gonna link those materials. I don't know. That's a vibe. I like it. Again, we just kind of threw this together like from scratch just for fun, but you guys can achieve this minimalistic look like this. I mean, this is how you would do it. Lastly, I'll just go over some render settings. I'll do 300 samples. Denoising, we'll just do optics, and then for the render settings, I'm gonna do 200% of what it normally is. And let's render this out and see. Let's just see how long it could take. Now, this is kind of a higher res render, so I'm really curious to see how this comes out. Oops, these ones came through. They weren't supposed to come through. They actually look kind of good in here. Let me make sure that they're not enabled for the render. All right. We had some hidden objects that were enabled for render. So we're going to go ahead and re-render now, and we're going to see how this comes out. It says it's going to take about 2 minutes and 10 seconds. I think it's going to take less time. If we zoom in here, we can already kind of start to see these really nice details. Now, this depth of field is really going to come through too. Another thing you could do, which I just thought about now, is you could apply a solidify modifier to these images as planes, give them a little bit more dimension. Right now, they kind of just look like pieces of paper, but if that's what you're going for, that's kind of what you get there. So, excuse me. We have about a minute left. Let's just go ahead and wait for this to render out, and then we'll wrap this tutorial up, and I'll probably use this for the thumbnail. I'm really excited about how this is coming out, though, guys. What do you guys think? I'm live streaming this right now as well, for those of you who don't know. So those of you watching this on YouTube right now, I am live streaming this, but again, this is just coming out so clean. Wow. That looks really nice. And the denoising hasn't even kicked in yet, but this rough glass just looks so good. It looks so clean. And then we can kind of see some caustics coming in here. And you can imagine if you did even more light paths, how good this would look. and the actual light source itself. I mean, there's just so many different things you can add to this aesthetic, but I just wanted to show you guys like some options on what kind of things you can throw together here, how you can make this thing look. This is just us kind of scrapping this together on the fly. It looks like we have about 20 seconds left on this render here. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. I actually wish this was the part in focus, but this, again, this kind of stuff is pretty easy to achieve. You just have to set up your lighting properly. That's really all it is. Half of Blender is lighting. You have to get proper lighting on your scene. Otherwise, it's not going to look correct. All right, here's denoising, and boom. It looks fantastic. You can see the depth of field could probably be adjusted a little bit, and if you really, really zoom in, you can see a little bit of noise in here. I mean, we only did 300 samples, but again, there's a little bit of noise going on in here, but you're not going to notice from a distance. This looks really good. It looks phenomenal. This is the kind of aesthetic you can achieve in Blender. A lot of people think this can only be done in certain programs like Cinema 4D or Houdini, or what is it? Different Maya, I think, is the other one. Yeah. So I don't really use those programs, but again, this is possible in Blender. There's your proof right there. Again, it's just about experimenting with the lighting, experimenting with the different IORs of the glass, the textures, the aesthetic, like the placement of objects. This was achieved entirely for free. I didn't pay for anything. Even the images themselves were all free off of Pexels, which is a free image sharing website. So yeah, guys, there's your minimalistic tutorial, your Windows XP or whatever it's called, Windows Vibe. That is it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun to throw together, and I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. This was more of just a fun, abstract walkthrough on kind of how to achieve these types of results in Blender. We're just using glass materials, some simple lighting techniques, very, very simple primitive objects with bevels and some subdivisions, a little wireframe modifier here, a little cool little shadow setup, some caustics. You can kind of see these caustics coming in right here where this green is. But yeah, that's it, guys. That is the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast. We'll do more tutorials like this if you guys enjoyed. Have a great day, and I will talk to you in the next one.